Previously, we saw leading, the space between the lines. Now we're going to move on to tracking, the space between the characters. Tracking has a close cousin, kerning. This is the distinction between the two. So tracking is when you are adjusting the space across a range of characters. Kerning, which we'll be covering in the next movie, is when you are adjusting the space between a pair of characters. So for example, if I select this text and then I use the keyboard shortcut for tracking, which is Option or Alt and the left arrow, I'm tracking. If, on the other hand, I put my cursor between these two characters or any two characters and I use the same keyboard shortcut, then I'm kerning. That's the distinction between the two. Now we can use tracking for aesthetic reasons. And this is a very broad generalization. But if you're working with serif type, which is the top row, and you apply loose tracking to that, I think that is much more effective than loose tracking applied to sans serif. On the other hand, if you want to reduce the amount of space and have negative tracking, I think that is more effective when working with sans serif. So a massive generalization, I know, but I'm going to say tight tracking, better for sans serif, loose tracking, better for serif. Now, as well as using tracking for aesthetic reasons, we can also use it in a practical way. Let's say that I have a paragraph that ends with a single word, as I do here, and I'd like to bring that word up to the previous line. Well, I will select the whole paragraph, and then I'll use the keyboard shortcut, Option or Alt, and the left arrow. Now you can see that when I do that, this value changes. -1, in this case, isn't enough. I'm just going to keep doing it until the word moves up to the previous line. And in this case, it has taken -5 units. What size are the units? They are 1,000th of an M. More on that in a moment. How much can you get away with? Because when you do this, for this reason, you don't want it to be noticeable to your reader. You don't want to give the impression that your text is a concertina and then it's getting tighter at some times and looser at others. It wants to appear uniform in its spacing. Well, I would say that if you need more than -10, then that's too much. Find another solution to the problem in that case. So anything up to -10, I'd say, is okay. Now, I've mentioned the keyboard shortcuts already. Option or Alt and left arrow to go tighter, or right arrow to go looser. Now, if you want to move in 5 times the default increment, hold down the Command key or the Control key on Windows as well. So Option, Command or Alt, Control, left arrow, or right arrow. Now, what is the default increment? Well, it's this one right here in the units and increments. If I press Command or Control K, that will bring up my preferences and then come to units and increments. It's this one here. Now, by default, that unit is 20. I've changed it on this document and I change it on all of my documents, or I actually make it an application-wide preference by changing it with no InDesign document open, because I prefer to have more control with a smaller increment. There is also an alternative to tracking, which is adjusting only the word spaces. Tracking will adjust the space between the letters and the words, but you can adjust the word spacing only. Now, for comparison, on the paragraph below, I'm going to bring the last word up using tracking, Option or Alt and the left arrow, and I'll tap that as many times as necessary, which it turns out is -12 units. But then on the top paragraph, I am instead going to use word spacing adjustment. This isn't available on the menus. You have to use keyboard shortcuts for this. The keyboard shortcut is Command Option Shift or Control Alt Shift and the backspace key. And then if you compare the two, we see that on the top, the word spacing has been reduced, but the spacing between the letters has been retained as what it was previously. Now, it may be a bit difficult to discern this on the screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these two, and then I'll come to my Align panel, and I will align their top edges so that the black now sits on top of the orange, and you can see that the letter spacing is tighter on the black than it is on the orange.